Rain lashes a young woman in her early 20s as she stumbles into a colossal, silent warehouse, escaping the relentless pursuit of angry voices and pounding boots through a decaying industrial district. Her clothes are torn, a bleeding gash on her arm throbs, and her skin glistens with moisture and grime. Inside, the air is cold, thick with the scent of dust and old stone, the vast space filled with towering, shrouded shapes like sleeping giants. Just as the heavy door clicks shut, sealing her in with the oppressive silence, a calm, resonant voice cuts through the profound darkness from unseen depths. Lost little bird. Who is this presence hidden in the shadows? Has she traded one prison for another, far more terrifying? Like the video and subscribe to the channel to catch more thrilling, emotional stories. Hit the bell and join our journey. The cold seeped through Lena's thin clothes, a chilling embrace that mimicked the fear coiling in her stomach. Rain, relentless and unforgiving, plastered strands of dark hair to her forehead, blurring the already faint lights of the industrial district. Each rasping breath she took was a gamble, a sound that could betray her in the oppressive silence between thunderclaps and the distant, mournful wail of a city that never truly slept. Behind her, the muffled clang of a security door slamming shut echoed the finality of her escape, but also the immediacy of her pursuers. Alarms, a hideous, screeching chorus, had begun to bleed into the night, a soundtrack to her desperate flight. She was 22, though in the last few months she felt she'd aged decades. The warehouse, a grimy, sprawling tomb where hope went to die, was a few blocks back now, but its stench of stale fear, unwashed bodies, and something metallic she refused to name still clung to her. A searing pain shot up her arm, where a splintered piece of wood had gashed her as she'd squeezed through a rotten section of fence. Blood, warm and sticky, trickled down her fingers, mingling with the rainwater. She pressed her palm against the wound, her teeth gritted against a whimper. Not now. There was no time for weakness now. The streets here were a labyrinth of decaying brick and rusted steel, forgotten arteries of a city that had long since moved on, leaving its bones to rot. Windows like vacant eyes stared out from darkened factories. The hum of distant traffic was a taunt, a reminder of a normal world she no longer felt a part of. Her bare feet, cut and bruised, pounded against the slick, uneven pavement of an alleyway. The metallic tang of her own blood was sharp in her nostrils, mixed with the smell of damp earth and overflowing dumpsters. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Shadows danced, distorted by the rain, and the unreliable glow of a flickering street lamp at the alley's entrance. Were they shapes or just her terror giving form to the darkness? A shout, closer this time, male, angry. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. They were gaining. She'd been so careful, so quiet, but the initial chaos of her breaking free had given them a trail. She pushed herself harder, her lungs burning, her legs screaming in protest. The alley opened into a wider, equally desolate street, lined with hulking structures that loomed like sleeping giants. Which way? There was no plan beyond escape, no sanctuary in mind, just the raw, animalistic need to get away. She remembered the faces of the others, the hollow eyes, the whispered stories of where they were supposedly being taken. She'd been one of the newer ones, still fighting, still too defiant for their liking. That defiance had earned her bruises and isolation, but it had also kept a spark alive, a tiny ember of resolve that had flared when she saw her chance. A distracted guard, a loose panel, a moment of pandemonium when a generator failed. She tried to signal to Anya, the girl in the bunk next to hers, the one who'd stopped speaking weeks ago, but there hadn't been time. The guilt was a fresh wound on top of all the others. Another shout and the distinct thud of heavy boots, closer. Desperation fueled her. She ducked behind a stack of rotting pallets, the wood damp and smelling of mildew. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could hear them now, their voices rough, curses carried on the wind. "She can't have gotten far," one voice snarled. "The overseer will have our heads if we lose her. She saw too much." Lena squeezed her eyes shut. The overseer. The name alone sent a shiver down her spine. A man she'd only glimpsed once, his face unremarkable, yet his eyes held a coldness that promised cruelty without passion, efficient and absolute. He was the architect of their misery, and she'd seen a ledger left carelessly on a table for a fleeting moment before she was shoved away. Names, numbers, locations. She hadn't understood it all, but the instinctive fear it generated told her it was important. Perhaps that was why they were so relentless. The sounds of her pursuers moved past her hiding spot. She waited, breath held, every muscle tensed. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The rain began to lessen, replaced by a chilling drizzle. Cautiously she peeked out. The street was empty again, swallowed by shadows. But they were still out there, fanning out, a net tightening around her. She needed a better hiding place, somewhere to rest, to think. Her gaze fell upon a particularly large warehouse at the end of the street. It seemed different from the others, less overtly decayed, its lines sharper against the bruised pre-dawn sky. Some of its windows were dark but intact, and the massive loading doors, though closed, didn't have the same air of abandonment as the surrounding structures. It exuded a strange, silent stillness. Perhaps it was still in use, which could be dangerous, but anything was better than the open street. With a surge of renewed, albeit terrified, energy, Lena darted across the street, her bare feet slapping against the wet asphalt. She reached the side of the warehouse, searching for an entry point. A narrow service door, set deep into the brickwork, looked promising. The handle was old, stiff, but to her surprise it turned. It wasn't locked. A wave of suspicion washed over her. Too easy. But the sounds of distant shouts spurred her on. She slipped inside, pulling the heavy door closed behind her with a soft click. Darkness, absolute and profound. And silence. A silence so deep it was almost a sound in itself, pressing against her eardrums. The air was cool, carrying the faint, unidentifiable scent of something old, like dust and stone, but clean, not the fetid air of her prison. She stood frozen, letting her eyes adjust, her senses straining. Was this a trap? Was she trading one cage for another? Slowly, shapes began to emerge from the blackness. She was in a vast space, the ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. Moonlight, filtered through grimy upper windows she hadn't seen from outside, cast ethereal beams across what looked like rows and rows of crates? No, not crates. Large shrouded forms, their outlines indistinct. An eerie museum-like stillness permeated the place. It was a warehouse, yes, but not for any goods she could recognize. It felt more like a mausoleum. A faint metallic scrape from the far end of the space sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her. She wasn't alone. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. She backed away, her fingers searching for the door handle she'd just left. But before she could find it, a voice, calm and resonant, cut through the silence. "Lost, little bird?" The voice was not unkind, but it held an edge of something ancient and powerful, a quality that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. It wasn't one of her captors. This was something different. She couldn't pinpoint its source. It seemed to come from the shadows themselves. Lena's terror spiked. She spun around, desperate to flee, but her foot caught on something unseen on the floor. She stumbled, crying out as fresh pain flared in her injured arm. She landed hard on her knees, the impact jarring through her body. Tears of pain and frustration welled in her eyes. Footsteps, measured and unhurried, approached her. Not the heavy, thudding steps of her pursuers, but light, almost soundless, like the fall of autumn leaves on soft earth. A tall, dark silhouette detached itself from the deeper shadows, resolving into the form of a man. He moved with a fluid grace that was unnervingly precise. Even in the dim light, she could make out sharp, elegant features, a stillness in his posture that spoke of immense control. He stopped a few feet from her. She could feel his gaze on her, intense and unreadable. "You're bleeding," he stated, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in the still air. It wasn't a question, but an observation. Lena scrambled backward, crab-like, until her back hit one of the shrouded forms. It was cold and hard beneath the covering. "Stay away from me," she choked out, her voice hoarse. He made no move to approach further. "They are still out there," he said, his head tilting slightly, as if listening to something beyond her hearing. "Your erstwhile guardians." Her blood ran cold. He knew. How could he know? Who are you?" she whispered, her gaze darting between him and the door, calculating her chances. They were slim to none. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his attention seemed to be drawn to something near her hand. She glanced down. In her fall, a small, tarnished silver locket, one she'd managed to keep hidden throughout her captivity, tucked into the waistband of her ragged trousers, had slipped out and lay on the dusty floor. It was her grandmother's, her only link to a life before this. The man's eyes, which seemed to catch the faint moonlight with an unnatural luminescence, narrowed slightly as he looked at the locket. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, so fleeting she might have imagined it. Then the sound of heavy banging on the service door she'd entered shattered the tense silence. "Open up, we know she's in there," a rough voice bellowed from outside. Lena's heart leaped into her throat. They'd found her trapped between these terrifying strangers outside and this enigmatic, unsettling man within. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of panic. Was he going to hand her over? The man, Julian Thorne, though she did not yet know his name, slowly turned his head towards the door. A sigh, almost imperceptible, escaped his lips. It was not a sigh of fear, but of something akin to annoyance, as if a tedious interruption had disturbed his solitude. "It seems," he murmured, his gaze returning to her, cool and appraising, "that your troubles have followed you to my doorstep." He took a step towards her, and this time Lena didn't flinch away, too frozen by the impending threat from outside. "Stay behind me," he said, not as a request but as a quiet command. And then, with a grace that belied any possible human speed, he moved towards the door, melting into the shadows just as the wood began to splinter under a heavy kick. The door burst inward with a crash, revealing two burly figures silhouetted against the faint pre-dawn light. They carried heavy flashlights and crude weapons. "There you are, you little rat!" one of them snarled, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, searching. Lena pressed herself against the shrouded object, her breath catching in her throat, expecting the man who called this place his to either join them or deliver her. Instead, she saw only shadows move. There was a blur, a sound too soft to be a struggle, more like a sigh of displaced air. One of the silhouettes at the door simply crumpled. The flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam skittering wildly. The second man yelled, a sound abruptly cut short. Another soft thud. Silence returned, absolute and chilling. Lena stared, her mind struggling to process what her eyes had barely registered. It had happened so fast, too fast. The man, Julian, stepped back into a sliver of moonlight, not a speck of dust on his impeccable dark clothing, not a hair out of place. He looked at the doorway, then back at her. His expression was unreadable, but there was no triumph, no exertion, only a profound stillness. He had dealt with them, effortlessly, and in a way that spoke of something far beyond ordinary human capability. Lena's fear, which had been a frantic, thrashing thing, solidified into a new, colder dread. She had escaped her captors, only to fall into the hands of something else. Something powerful, dangerous, and utterly unknown. The gritty industrial district outside, with its rain and its tangible threats, suddenly seemed almost preferable to this silent, cavernous space and the terrifyingly calm man who commanded it. Julian Thorne regarded the young woman cowering in the dim light. Lena, he'd heard her pursuers call her that. She was small, drenched, and injured, her eyes wide with a terror that was almost primal. He could smell her fear, a sharp, acrid scent, mingling with the copper of her blood and the grime of the city. It was a familiar aroma, one he'd encountered countless times over the centuries, though rarely this concentrated, this raw. He felt a flicker of something akin to distaste, not for her, but for the crudity of her hunters, for the sheer brutish mess they'd made. His domain, this particular warehouse district, was meant to be quiet, a buffer between his more private sanctums and the relentless churn of the mortal world. These thugs, and the organization they represented, had been a growing irritation, their tendrils creeping too close. He'd been contemplating a more thorough cleansing of their influence for some time. Her desperate flight had simply accelerated the timetable. "They will not bother you again," Julian stated, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. He made no move to approach her further, sensing that any sudden action would send her spiraling into deeper panic. Lena stared at him, her chest heaving. She said nothing, her gaze fixed on him with a mixture of horrified awe and profound suspicion. He could almost see the thoughts racing through her mind. Who was he? What was he? Was he worse than what she'd just escaped? Sensible questions, all things considered. He gestured vaguely towards the interior of the warehouse. You are injured. That needs attention. His senses, far more acute than any human's, could detect the ragged tear in her flesh, the thready pulse of blood. It wasn't life-threatening, not yet, but infection was a risk in her weakened state. Lena flinched as if his words were a physical touch. I don't need anything from you, she managed, her voice trembling but laced with a defiant spark that he noted with a detached sort of interest. Resilience, a quality often in short supply. Perhaps not, Julian conceded smoothly, but you are in my property, and you are attracting this unwelcome attention. He paused. The city is not a safe place for you tonight. Or any night soon, I imagine, if those apes are any indication of your enemy's persistence. Her eyes darted towards the broken doorway, then back to him. The fear was still there, but a sliver of calculation was creeping in. She was trapped, and some part of her knew it. What do you want? She finally asked, the words barely a whisper. A complex question. What did he want? Peace, mostly. An end to the disruptions. This girl, Lena, was an anomaly, an unexpected variable. His initial instinct was to remove the threat she represented. Not her, but those who hunted her, and then send her on her way, erased from his immediate concerns. Yet, there was something about the locket that had fallen from her grasp. A faint, almost imperceptible resonance that tugged at a thread of ancient memory, something he couldn't quite place. And there was her defiance, that small stubborn ember. It was intriguing. For now, Julian said, I want you to not bleed all over my antiquities. He allowed a hint of dryness into his tone. Come, there is a place where you can be seen to. He turned and began to walk deeper into the warehouse, not waiting to see if she followed. He knew she would. The alternative, returning to the streets where her hunters, or worse, their superiors, were undoubtedly regrouping, was unthinkable. He moved with an unnerving silence, his dark form a silhouette against the faint light filtering from unseen sources. Lena remained frozen for a moment, her heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but where? Back to the men who wanted her dead, or worse? This man. He was terrifying, his power palpable and unnatural. But he hadn't hurt her. He'd eliminated her immediate pursuers with chilling efficiency. She was caught between a monster she knew and one she didn't. Hesitantly, clutching her injured arm, she pushed herself to her feet. Her legs felt like water, but she forced them to move. The shrouded forms she'd huddled against were, she now saw, enormous pieces of statuary, ancient and imposing, covered in canvas dropcloths. The warehouse was less a storage facility and more a private museum, filled with artifacts that seemed to hum with age. Dust motes danced in the occasional shafts of moonlight, the scent of old stone, dry wood, and something else, something faintly metallic and ozonic, like the air before a storm, filled her nostrils. Julian led her through aisles of these silent sentinels, towards a far corner of the building, where a heavy steel door was set into the wall. He opened it with no apparent effort, revealing a surprisingly modern, clean corridor, brightly lit with recessed lighting. The contrast with the cavernous, shadowed space they'd just left was jarring. This way, he said, his voice devoid of inflection. Lena followed, her senses on high alert. The corridor led to another door which opened into a small, sparsely furnished room. It contained a simple bed, a chair, and an attached bathroom. It was clean, sterile, almost clinical. Wait here, Julian instructed. Someone will attend to your arm. He didn't wait for a response before turning and leaving, the door closing behind him, with a soft, decisive click. Lena stared at the closed door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was alone but not free. The room felt like a cage, albeit a more comfortable one than she'd recently known. She stumbled towards the small, hard bed and sank onto it, the adrenaline that had sustained her for hours finally beginning to ebb, leaving her weak and trembling. Her arm throbbed painfully. Who was someone? Another creature like him. A few minutes later, which felt like an eternity, the door opened again. An older man entered carrying a medical kit. He was small and wiry, with kind, weary eyes and thinning grey hair. He wore a simple, dark suit that seemed slightly too large for him. He offered her a tentative, almost shy smile. "Miss, my name is Elias. Mr. Thorne asked me to see to your injuries." His voice was soft, gentle, a stark contrast to Julian's resonant baritone. Lena eyed him warily. "Are you like him?" She couldn't help but ask. Elias's smile faltered slightly. He seemed to understand her unspoken question. "No, miss, I am quite human, I assure you." He set the kit down on the chair. "May I?" he asked, gesturing towards her arm. Reluctantly, Lena extended her injured arm. Elias was careful, his touch surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the gash, hissing softly in sympathy when she winced. He worked with an efficiency that suggested he'd done this before. "Mr. Thorne, he saved me," Lena said, the words tasting strange on her tongue. It was true, but the nature of that salvation was deeply unsettling. Elias nodded, his focus on bandaging her arm. "He has his own ways, miss, often direct." "What is he?" Lena pressed, unable to contain her curiosity and fear. Elias finished tying off the bandage and met her gaze. His eyes were sad, understanding. "He is Mr. Thorne, a man of considerable resources and a very long history." It was an evasion, but a gentle one. "He values his privacy greatly, and he does not tolerate certain kinds of cruelty in his vicinity. The men outside, they will trouble you no more," Elias said quietly, a finality in his tone that brooked no argument. He then offered her a small bottle of water and some sealed crackers from his pocket. "You should rest. You are safe here for now." Safe? The word felt alien. She was in the lair of a creature of immense power, whose motives were a mystery, but Elias's quiet presence was strangely reassuring. He seemed normal, a fragile link to a world she understood. After Elias left, Lena drank the water and ate the crackers, the first food she'd had in what felt like days. Exhaustion, deep and profound, began to pull at her. She lay down on the bed, her mind still reeling. Julian Thorne, a man of long history. What did that mean? She thought of his eyes, ancient and knowing, the effortless way he'd dispatched her attackers. He was no ordinary millionaire. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful, haunted by fractured images, the stench of the warehouse, the cold eyes of the overseer, and then a tall, dark figure moving through shadows with impossible grace, his gaze holding a power she couldn't comprehend. She saw the small tarnished locket, her grandmother's locket, lying on the dusty floor, and in her dream it pulsed with a faint, cold light when Julian Thorne looked at it. Days blurred into a strange, suspended reality. Lena spent most of her time in the small, sterile room. Elias brought her food, simple but nourishing meals, and fresh clothes, plain and dark, which appeared as if by magic. He would check her wound, which, under his care, began to heal cleanly. He spoke little, mostly answering her tentative questions with polite deflections, but his presence was a small anchor of humanity in this unnerving new world. She learned that Julian Thorne's residence was a sprawling complex, part of which was this renovated warehouse district, a labyrinth of interconnected buildings, some ancient and filled with artifacts, others surprisingly modern and utilitarian. She never saw Julian himself, but she felt his presence, an oppressive awareness that he was nearby, watching, perhaps. The silence of the place was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the city or the quiet rustle of Elias going about his duties. Her fear of Julian remained, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overlaid with a reluctant curiosity. He had saved her, albeit terrifyingly. He was keeping her safe, protected, or was she merely a prisoner in a more gilded cage? She replayed their brief encounter in her mind, his chilling efficiency, his unreadable expression. He was an enigma, a creature of shadows and immense controlled power. One afternoon, desperate for something beyond the four walls of her room, Lena cautiously opened her door. The corridor was empty. Elias had told her she was free to move within certain areas, though his definition of certain areas had been vague. Emboldened by a surge of restlessness, she began to explore. She found her way back to the massive warehouse where she'd first encountered Julian. In the daylight, filtered through the high, grimy windows, It was less terrifying, more like a forgotten museum. The shrouded statues and artifacts seemed to sleep under their canvas covers. The air was still and cool, smelling of dust and age. She walked slowly, her footsteps echoing softly in the immensity of the space. She found the spot where she'd fallen, where her locket had slipped from her grasp. The locket. She touched her neck. Elias had returned it to her the day after her arrival, cleaned and polished, its silver gleaming faintly. She'd been surprised he'd even noticed it, let alone taken the care to return it. Or had it been Julian's instruction? As she stood there, a faint sound reached her, music. Classical music, a melancholic piano piece drifting from somewhere deeper within the complex. It was beautiful, hauntingly so, and it pulled at her. Following the sound, she moved through another heavy door, left slightly ajar, and found herself in what appeared to be a vast private library. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, thousands upon thousands of them, their leather-bound spines glowing richly in the soft lamplight. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and beeswax. In the center of the room, seated at a grand piano, was Julian Thorne. His back was to her, his fingers moving over the keys with a practiced, effortless grace, drawing forth the sorrowful melody. Lena froze, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected to see him. She should retreat, slip away unnoticed, but the music held her captive. It was filled with a profound sadness, a longing that resonated deep within her own bruised soul. She listened, mesmerized, until the final notes faded into silence. Julian Thorne sat motionless for a moment, his hands resting on the keys. Then, without turning, he spoke, his voice calm, resonant. "You appreciate Chopin?" Lena jumped, startled. He'd known she was there, of course he had. Yes, she stammered, feeling foolish. "It's beautiful." He finally turned on the piano bench, his gaze unreadable. He was dressed impeccably in dark, tailored clothes, looking more like a reclusive scholar than the terrifying figure from her nightmares. "Music is one of the few human endeavors that has improved with age," he commented, a hint of something unidentifiable in his tone. "Sadness? Cynicism?" "You play very well," Lena offered, trying to keep her voice steady. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, so fleeting she might have imagined it. "I've had considerable practice, sir." He gestured towards the rows of books. "Elias informed me you were restless. Perhaps you might find some distraction here." It wasn't an invitation, more a statement of allowance. Lena looked at the towering shelves, a lifetime of stories, knowledge, and forgotten worlds. It was overwhelming. "Thank you," she said softly. An awkward silence descended. Lena felt an urge to ask the questions that burned within her. "Who are you? Why are you helping me? What do you want?" But the words wouldn't come. His presence was too imposing, the chasm between their realities too vast. Julian seemed to sense her turmoil. "Elias tells me your arm is healing well." "Yes, he's been very kind." "Elias is a man of practical compassion," Julian observed. He rose from the piano bench and walked towards a large window that overlooked a walled courtyard, its stone flags green with moss. The city skyline was visible in the distance, a hazy silhouette against the afternoon sky. "Your former associates," he said, his back still to her, "have been neutralized. Their particular enterprise has ceased to operate." Lena's heart gave a strange leap. Neutralized, ceased to operate. It sounded so clinical, so final, a wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. The overseer, gone. The fear that had been her constant companion for months lessened its grip, just a fraction. "Truly? Truly." He turned, his eyes meeting hers. They were dark, ancient, holding depth she couldn't fathom. "You are no longer being hunted by them." A new fear, however, began to surface. If she was no longer hunted, what was her purpose here? Was he going to ask her to leave? The thought of returning to the world outside, alone and adrift, was suddenly terrifying in a different way. This strange, silent sanctuary, ruled by its enigmatic master, had become perversely a refuge. "What about the others?" Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Anya, the faces in the warehouse. Were there others you found?" Julian's expression remained impassive. "My interest was primarily in dismantling the organization that threatened the tranquility of my territory." The disposition of their other victims was handled by more conventional and appropriate authorities once the primary threat was removed. He paused. An anonymous tip, you understand. Lena understood. He wouldn't involve himself directly with the mundane world of police and social services, but he had, in his own way, ensured they were found. A flicker of something warm, almost like gratitude, touched her. "Why?" she asked, the question finally escaping her. "Why did you help me? Why do all this?" Julian regarded her for a long moment, his gaze intense. "Let us say," he began slowly, "that I have a long-standing intolerance for certain kinds of predators. This particular network, they employed methods and symbols that resonated with an older, more personal grievance." He didn't elaborate, but Lena saw a shadow pass through his eyes, a glimpse of a pain so ancient it was almost unimaginable. This was the first narrative hook connecting Julian's past to her situation, just as the blueprint suggested. Julian isn't just a random, powerful being. It's revealed he has a long-standing, undeclared war against this specific trafficking network due to a past event that deeply affected him. Symbols. Lena's mind flashed to a crude snake-like sigil she'd seen carved into the wall of her cell, and on a pendant worn by one of the guards. She'd thought it was just some gang insignia. Could that be what he meant? Lena recognizes a specific symbol or person from her captivity that Julian also seems to have a dark history with. Before she could voice this, Julian continued, his tone shifting slightly. "And you, Lena, despite your unfortunate circumstances, possess a certain tenacity. It is a rare quality." He looked towards the window again. "It reminded me of someone from a very long time ago." There it was, another glimpse into his haunted past. A lost love, a past betrayal. The blueprint mentioned revealing his tragic past gradually. This was a subtle hint. Lena didn't know what to say. The immensity of his age, his experiences, was a tangible presence in the room. He had lived through epochs, witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Her own brief, brutal suffering must seem insignificant in comparison. "You are free to use the library," Julian said, his voice once again coolly detached. "Elias can guide you. There are few restrictions here, provided you do not seek to venture beyond the main complex without my knowledge." It wasn't an offer of friendship or even companionship. It was a statement of terms. She was a guest or perhaps a protected curiosity, but for now it was enough. It was safety. It was a chance to breathe, to heal, not just her body but her mind. Over the following weeks, a fragile, unspoken truce settled between Lena and Julian Thorne. She spent hours in the library, losing herself in books, the scent of old paper, a soothing balm. She discovered a love for history, for stories of resilience and survival that echoed her own unvoiced experiences. Elias would often find her there, curled up in a deep armchair, a book open in her lap, and he would bring her tea or a light snack, his presence a quiet comfort. She rarely saw Julian. When she did, it was often by chance, a glimpse of him in a shadowy corridor, the distant sound of his piano, or a brief, formal encounter in the library where he would be examining some ancient tome or map. Their conversations were sparse, stilted, yet Lena began to sense a subtle shift in his demeanor. The initial cold detachment was still there, but occasionally she would catch a flicker of something else in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps even a weary sort of protectiveness. This aligns with the tender moment. Julian, observing Lena when she thinks she's alone, witnesses an act of quiet defiance or compassion from her, which cracks his indifferent facade. While not a stray animal, her quiet immersion in books, her visible attempts to heal and find solace, could be that act. One evening, as a storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil that still occasionally surfaced within her, Lena was in the library, tracing the lines of a constellation map in an old astronomy atlas. The power flickered, then died, plunging the vast room into near-total darkness, save for the erratic flashes of lightning that illuminated the towering shelves like ghostly sentinels. A wave of primal fear, sharp and suffocating, washed over her. The darkness, the sudden helplessness, it threw her back to the warehouse, to the terror of her captivity. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her heart hammering. It is merely a power surge. Julian's calm voice cut through the blackness, startlingly close. She hadn't heard him enter. The city's infrastructure is unreliable. A moment later, a soft glow emanated from his direction. He held a candelabrum, its 3 flames casting dancing shadows on his face, making his features seem even more angular and mysterious. He placed it on a nearby table. "Are you all right?" he asked. There was a subtle inflection in his voice, something that might have been concern. Lena was trembling, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Yes, just startled," she managed, though her voice shook. She hated this weakness, this lingering trauma that could ambush her at any moment. Julian regarded her for a moment, his eyes seeming to pierce the gloom. "Fear is a shadow," he said softly. "It feeds on darkness, but it has no substance of its own." He paused. "I too have known profound darkness." It was a rare admission, a glimpse beneath the icy composure. Shared nightmare vulnerability. Lena has a vivid nightmare about her captivity, and Julian, either through vampire senses or proximity, is aware of it, leading to a brief, unguarded moment where he acknowledges shared experiences of suffering or being hunted. This wasn't a nightmare, but the storm-induced fear was close enough to trigger this sharing. Lena looked at him, the candlelight flickering in his ancient eyes. For the first time she felt a connection, however tenuous, to this enigmatic being, a shared understanding of suffering, of having faced the abyss. "It's hard to forget," she whispered. "One does not forget," Julian corrected gently. "One integrates, or one is consumed." He looked away, towards the rain-lashed windows. "The storm will pass. The lights will return." They stood in silence for a while, the only sounds the drumming of rain and the crackle of the candles. The fear within Lena slowly receded, replaced by a strange sense of calm. In his presence, despite everything, she felt protected. "Elias tells me you found the section on ancient cartography," Julian said, his voice returning to its usual cool tone, the moment of shared vulnerability passing. Lena nodded, grateful for the change of subject. "It's fascinating. The world looked so different then." "The world is always different," Julian mused. "It is only our perception that lags behind." He picked up a small leather-bound book from a nearby shelf, its pages brittle with age. This one details voyages to lands that no longer exist, swallowed by the sea. A reminder that nothing is permanent, not even the ground beneath our feet. He didn't offer her the book, but simply held it, his long fingers tracing its worn cover. Lena found herself wondering about the things he had seen, the losses he must have endured over his unnaturally long existence. The tragic past hinted at felt more real in that moment. The lights flickered back on then as suddenly as they had gone out, flooding the library with a warm, steady glow. Julian blinked slowly, as if adjusting, and then, with a nod that was almost a dismissal, he turned and left the library, the candelabrum still burning on the table, a small beacon in the vastness of the room. Lena watched him go, a whirlwind of emotions stirring within her, fear, gratitude, curiosity, and something else, something akin to a fragile, budding trust. He was a creature of darkness, yes, but he had also shown her moments of unexpected humanity, or perhaps something that transcended humanity. She picked up the candelabrum, its warmth comforting in her hand. She knew her life was irrevocably changed. The world she had known was gone, and this new shadowed existence, under the watchful eye of Julian Thorne, was her reality now. It was a daunting prospect, but as the storm outside began to subside, Lena felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time, a tentative, fragile hope. The weeks turned into a couple of months. Lena's physical wounds had long since healed, but the scars on her psyche were more stubborn. Nightmares still visited her, less frequently now, but potent enough to leave her shaken. Yet, the sanctuary of Julian Thorne's domain, with its quiet rhythms and the silent, watchful presence of its master, provided a strange kind of stability. She fell into a routine, mornings spent reading in the vast library, afternoons sometimes helping Elias with small tasks, organizing newly acquired documents, dusting ancient artifacts that seemed to hum with forgotten stories. Elias became a quiet confidant. He never spoke of Julian's true nature, nor of his own long service, but he would share anecdotes about the city, about history, about the resilience of the human spirit, always with a gentle wisdom that soothed Lena's frayed nerves. He taught her how to properly care for old books, the scent of leather and aging paper becoming synonymous with a fragile peace. Julian remained an enigma. His appearances were sporadic, often unannounced. He would find her in the library, perhaps, and they would exchange a few words about a book she was reading, a piece of music he'd been playing, a historical event. These conversations were always brief, formal, yet Lena began to detect subtle shifts, a lingering gaze, a question that seemed to probe deeper than mere politeness, a rare, almost imperceptible softening around his eyes when she spoke of something that moved her. He was observing her, she knew, in the same way a naturalist might study a rare creature released into a new, carefully controlled habitat. One afternoon, while exploring a lesser-used wing of the interconnected warehouses, a section filled with covered furniture and crates stenciled with faded shipping marks from decades past, Lena stumbled upon a small, locked wooden box tucked away on a dusty shelf. It was unremarkable save for a peculiar symbol carved into its lid, the same serpentine sigil she'd seen in her captivity, the one that had seemed to trigger a dark resonance in Julian. This is the narrative hook. Lena recognizes a specific symbol or person from her captivity that Julian also seems to have a dark history with, and the mysterious artifact Lena unknowingly carried from her captivity seems to react to Julian's presence. Here it's not her locket, but an external object with the same symbol. Her heart hammered. Why was that symbol here in Julian's domain? Was it a trophy, a reminder, or something more sinister? She reached out to touch it, then hesitated. This felt like forbidden territory. Later that day, she found Elias in the main library, carefully cataloguing a new shipment of old maps. Elias, she began hesitantly, that symbol, the snake-like one. I've seen it before, in the place where they kept me. Elias paused, his pen hovering over a ledger. His kindly face became carefully neutral. Indeed, miss. And I saw it again today, on a small wooden box in the west storage wing. Elias set down his pen. He looked older, wearier in that moment. Some objects carry the echoes of their past, Miss Lena. Some echoes are best left undisturbed. His tone was gentle but firm, a warning. Lena felt a chill. Julian had mentioned his long-standing intolerance for those who used such symbols. This suggested a deeper, more dangerous connection than she had imagined. Julian's uncanny knowledge of the city's underbelly and her captor's operations. This is being reinforced. The uneasy peace was shattered a few days later. Lena was in the courtyard, a small walled oasis of green amidst the stone and steel, sketching the gnarled branches of an ancient olive tree that grew in its center, an act of quiet defiance, a reclamation of a small joy. Suddenly Elias appeared, his face pale, his usual composure gone. "Miss Lena," he said, his voice urgent, "you must come with me, now, quickly." "Elias, what is it?" "There is no time for explanations. Mr. Thorne, he requires your presence. There has been a development." A knot of dread tightened in Lena's stomach. The way Elias said Mr. Thorne, it was different, laced with an anxiety she'd never heard from him before. She followed him at a brisk walk, her sketchbook forgotten on the stone bench. He led her not to the library or Julian's usual study, but deep into the more modern, fortified section of the complex, an area she'd never seen. They passed through heavy, electronically secured doors, down sterile corridors, until they reached a room that looked like a high-tech command center. Banks of monitors lined one wall, some showing security feeds from around the perimeter, others displaying complex data streams. Julian stood before the monitors, his back to them. He was utterly still, but Lena could feel a palpable tension radiating from him, a coiled energy that made the air crackle. "Elias," Julian said without turning, "is she secure?" "Yes, Mr. Thorne, she is here." Julian finally turned. His face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes like chips of ice. It was the most emotion she had ever seen him display, and it was terrifying. "They found us," he stated flatly. Lena's blood ran cold. "Who?" "The traffickers. I thought you said—" "Not your former captors directly." Julian interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. They're masters, or at least those who have an interest in their assets. He gestured to one of the screens. It showed a grainy, zoomed-in image of several figures in dark tactical gear deploying from an unmarked van several blocks away. They were armed, moving with professional precision. They are not common thugs. These are specialists, specialized hunters, the blueprint mentioned. This was it. But how? Lena whispered. How did they find me here? Julian's gaze flickered towards her, and for a moment she saw something in his eyes that looked like regret or self-reproach. They were not looking for you specifically, not at first. He paused. They were tracking an artifact, something they believe you may have inadvertently carried away from their facility. Lena's mind raced. The locket. But she'd had that since her grandmother. Or was it something else? Something she hadn't even realized she possessed. The escape's catalyst. Lena wasn't just a random victim. She perhaps overheard something crucial or possessed a small item that makes her a particular target for the traffickers, raising the stakes beyond just a runaway. This artifact hook now combines with her specific target status. I don't understand, she said. I don't have anything of theirs. It seems, Julian said, his voice grim, that your little locket, the one you treasure, is more than just a family heirloom. It appears to be a key or a marker related to something they value very highly. Something very old and very dangerous. Lena's hand flew to her neck, her fingers closing around the tarnished silver. Her grandmother's locket, a key. How? Before she could ask, an alarm blared, a shrill, insistent screech that was far more urgent than the city power failure. Red lights began to flash throughout the command center. Perimeter breach Sector Gamma, Elias announced, his voice tight, his eyes fixed on a flashing monitor. Julian swore, a soft, vicious sound in a language Lena didn't recognize. They are more resourceful than I anticipated, or someone is aiding them, someone who knows my defenses. His eyes narrowed. Julian receives a cryptic warning from an ancient associate about sheltering a marked human. This could be the someone aiding them, or it could be a separate event I still need to weave in, perhaps Julian reflecting on an earlier warning he dismissed. For now, the idea of an internal betrayal or an enemy with deep knowledge works. He turned to Lena, his expression hard. There is no time for explanations now. Elias will take you to the secure core. You will remain there, no matter what you hear. But what about you? Lena cried, a surprising surge of protectiveness, of fear for him rising within her. A humorless smile touched Julian's lips. I will be inhospitable. This is my domain. They will not take it, nor what is within it, easily. His eyes met hers, and for a fleeting second, the cold fury was replaced by that same weary protectiveness she'd glimpsed before. Stay safe, Lena. Elias gently but firmly took her arm. This way, miss. Quickly. As Elias pulled her towards a reinforced door, Lena looked back. Julian Thorne stood before the monitors, a solitary, dark figure against the flashing red lights, preparing to defend his ancient sanctuary. He seemed less like a man and more like a primal force, an elemental power about to be unleashed, and she, somehow, was at the center of this storm. Her grandmother's locket, a simple piece of silver, now felt like a burning weight against her skin. The secure core was a small windowless room deep within the complex, its walls thick reinforced concrete. Elias settled Lena inside, his face etched with worry, but his demeanor was resolute. Mr. Thorne is formidable, Miss Lena. He has weathered many storms. But these men, they're not like the others, Lena said, her voice trembling. She remembered the cold professionalism in their movements on the screen. Indeed, Elias acknowledged grimly. But they do not know who or what they are truly facing. He checked the seals on the heavy door. Remain here. Do not open this door for anyone but myself or Mr. Thorne. Do you understand? Lena nodded, her throat tight. Elias gave her a brief, reassuring nod, then slipped out, the door thudding shut with an ominous finality, the heavy bolts locking into place automatically. Lena was alone, plunged into a silence that was almost worse than the alarms. The air was cool, recycled, sterile. There was a single bench, a supply of water, and a basic emergency kit. She sank onto the bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the locket a cold pressure against her palm. A key? To what? And why had her grandmother given it to her with such quiet insistence, telling her to always keep it safe, that it was more than it seemed? Time stretched, each second an agony of suspense. She could hear nothing from outside the secure core, no sounds of fighting, no explosions, nothing. The silence was a torment, her imagination filling it with terrible possibilities. Was Julian all right? Was Elias? This was her fault. If she hadn't had the locket, if she hadn't escaped... No, she wouldn't think like that. She had a right to escape, a right to be free. And Julian, he had made his choices. He had his own reasons for fighting these people, reasons that predated her arrival. Still, the guilt gnawed at her. Hours seemed to pass. She paced the small room, her anxiety mounting with every silent minute. She thought of Julian, standing alone against an unknown number of heavily armed professional hunters. She remembered the effortless, terrifying speed with which he dealt with her initial pursuers. But these were different. They knew what they were looking for. Did they also know what Julian was? The blueprint mentioned the hunters might have some knowledge of supernatural entities. Suddenly, a muffled thud reverberated through the concrete walls, followed by another, closer this time. Lena froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The fighting was getting nearer. Was Julian being overwhelmed? She pressed her ear to the cold steel door, straining to hear. Faintly she could make out shouts, the clang of metal on metal, and a strange, high-pitched whining sound she couldn't identify. And then a scream. A human scream, abruptly cut short. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She backed away from the door, her breath catching in her throat. Julian had told her to stay put, no matter what. But the thought of him out there, fighting alone, possibly injured. She remembered something she'd seen during her brief explorations. Something Elias had shown her once, almost as an afterthought. A hidden panel in one of the older, disused corridors not far from here, leading to a narrow service tunnel system that honeycombed parts of the ancient foundations. Elias had called it a relic of a bygone era, mostly sealed off. But he'd shown her one accessible entrance, remarking on the cleverness of old builders. Could she reach it? Could it offer a way to see what was happening or even help? It was a reckless, foolish idea. She was no fighter. What could she possibly do? But the alternative, cowering here while others fought and perhaps died for her, was unbearable. Her trauma, her fear, it was still there. But something else was stirring within her now. A fierce, protective loyalty, a desperate need to act, to not be a helpless victim anymore. Lena, using information she gleaned during her captivity, actively helps Julian defend against the attackers, perhaps by setting traps or providing crucial intel that turns the tide. She uses her trauma to fuel her fight. This was her moment. She didn't have intel on these attackers, but she knew the layout of parts of the complex better than they did. With trembling fingers, Lena unlatched a small emergency toolkit from the wall. It contained a heavy flashlight, a pry bar, a multi-tool. Not weapons, but perhaps enough. She took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying. She wouldn't wait to be rescued. She would contribute somehow. The main door to the secure core was impregnable from the inside without a code, but she remembered Elias mentioning that these cores sometimes had emergency overrides for ventilation, usually hidden. Her eyes scanned the smooth walls. There, near the floor, a small, almost invisible seam. Using the pry bar, she worked at it, her muscles straining. With a groan of protesting metal, a small panel sprang open, revealing a recessed lever. She pulled it. With a hiss of hydraulics, a narrow section of the wall slid inward, revealing a dark, cramped opening. It wasn't a main exit, but it looked like it connected to the service passages. It was a gamble. Taking the flashlight, Lena squeezed into the opening. The passage was tight, dusty, and smelled of damp earth and something else. A faint, metallic tang, like old blood, or new. Her heart hammered, but she pushed forward, guided by a desperate hope and a growing fear. She had to do something. The passage twisted and turned, sloping downwards. Faint sounds of the conflict began to filter through the ancient stone and brickwork, muffled shouts, the occasional explosive crack, and a sound like tearing metal. Lena moved as quickly as she dared, her flashlight beam bobbing ahead of her. She was navigating by instinct and fragmented memories of Elias's brief tour of the historical parts of the Foundation. She remembered him pointing out a ventilation shaft that, he joked, was probably large enough for a person if they were desperate, and that it emerged near the old boiler room, which was adjacent to one of the main storage halls, closer to where she guessed the fighting might be concentrated. Finally she saw it, a rusted iron ladder leading up to a grated opening. The sounds of combat were louder here, more distinct. She could hear guttural yells, the unmistakable sickening thud of bodies hitting the floor, and Julian's voice, low and strained, speaking in that strange ancient language, uttering words that seemed to crackle with power. With her heart pounding, Lena climbed the ladder. The grate was heavy, secured with rusted bolts. She fumbled with the multi-tool from the emergency kit, her hands slick with sweat. One bolt gave way, then another. With a final, desperate heave, she pushed the grate upwards. It shifted with a screech of metal, opening just enough for her to squeeze through. She emerged into the cavernous, shadowy space of the old boiler room. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, hot metal, and blood. The main storage hall, where she'd first met Julian, was through a set of heavy double doors. The sounds of intense fighting were coming from just beyond them. Peeking through a narrow gap where one of the doors was slightly ajar, Lena gasped. The scene was chaotic. Several figures in dark tactical gear lay motionless on the floor. Two more were engaging Julian, who moved with a preternatural speed and ferocity that was terrifying to behold. He was a blur of motion, his dark clothes swirling around him, his hands striking with deadly precision. But he was outnumbered, and one of the attackers, a large, heavily armored man, wielded a strange glowing weapon, a sort of high-tech spear that crackled with blue energy. Each time Julian neared him, the energy seemed to cause him visible pain, forcing him back. Julian was bleeding. Dark, almost black blood seeped from a gash on his arm and another on his temple. He looked tired. The centuries were etched on his face, not as age, but as an immense, soul-deep weariness. Yet he fought on, a cornered lion, his movements still lethally graceful but slower now, less certain. One of the attackers lunged, distracting Julian, while the man with the energy spear maneuvered to flank him. Lena's breath caught. Julian wouldn't see him in time. In that instant, Lena didn't think. She acted. Her gaze fell upon a heavy steel fire poker leaning against one of the cold, massive boilers. It was long, solid. She grabbed it. It felt heavy, unwieldy in her hands, but her grip was firm. The man with the spear raised his weapon, aiming for Julian's exposed back. "No!" Lena screamed, bursting through the doors, brandishing the poker like a clumsy sword. Her shout, raw and desperate, momentarily startled everyone, including Julian. The attacker with the spear hesitated for a fraction of a second, his head turning towards the unexpected sound. That fraction was all Julian needed. He spun, a whirlwind of dark fury, and disarmed the man with a brutal efficiency, the energy spear clattering to the floor. But the other attacker, recovering quickly, charged at Lena, seeing her as an easy target. She froze, the poker feeling useless in her grip, her sudden courage deserting her. Before he could reach her, Julian was there, intercepting him. There was a brief, savage flurry of movement, and then the man crumpled, silent. Julian stood panting, his chest heaving, the dark blood stark against his pale skin. He looked at Lena, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fury, astonishment, and something else she couldn't name. "What in all the hells are you doing here?" he rasped, his voice hoarse. "I told you to stay in the core." I couldn't," Lena stammered, the poker slipping from her numb fingers. They were... Before she could finish, the last remaining conscious attacker, the one who'd wielded the spear, scrambled for a sidearm. Julian tensed, but he was clearly exhausted, his movements slower. The man raised the weapon, aiming it straight at Julian's heart. Lena saw it all in slow motion. There was no time for Julian to react. Without a thought for her own safety, she threw herself in front of Julian, her arms spread wide, a shield, a desperate, foolish human shield. "No!" she cried again. The attacker, surprised by her sudden reappearance and selfless act, hesitated. His eyes, cold and ruthless, met hers. For an instant, she saw not a monster, but a man, a killer. momentarily thrown off by an act of such unexpected, reckless sacrifice. That hesitation cost him. Julian, galvanized by Lena's unbelievable courage, moved with a final desperate surge of speed. He was on the man in an instant. The shot went wild, ricocheting off a stone pillar with a deafening crack. Then silence, save for their ragged breathing. The last attacker lay still. Lena was trembling violently, her legs about to give way. Julian turned to her, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He reached out, his hand, stained with his own dark blood, hovering near her shoulder as if he wasn't sure he should touch her. You saved me," he said, his voice raw with disbelief. He, Julian Thorne, who had walked the earth for centuries, who had faced down armies and horrors unimaginable, had just been saved by this small, terrified, astonishingly brave young woman. "You saved me first," Lena whispered, tears streaming down her face, a mixture of relief and residual terror. She looked at him, truly looked at him, no longer seeing just the fearsome vampire, the ancient enigma, but someone who bled, someone who could be hurt, someone who had against all odds protected her, and someone she, in turn, had felt compelled to protect. Emotional revelation. During a desperate moment in the fight, Julian risks his own safety to an unprecedented degree to protect Lena, revealing the depth of his protective instincts. Lena, in turn, chooses to trust him fully, perhaps even protecting him from a vulnerability her attackers try to exploit. They fight together, not just him for her. This moment was the culmination of that. Julian's gaze softened, the icy fury replaced by a profound, weary astonishment. He did touch her then, his fingers gently closing around her arm, steadying her. His touch was cool, but not unpleasant. It was grounding. "You are?" he said, a faint, incredulous smile playing on his lips. "The most reckless, infuriating, and utterly remarkable human I have encountered in a very long time." In the aftermath of the battle, the vast warehouse was a scene of carnage and devastation. Shrouded statues were overturned, ancient crates splintered. The air was thick with the scent of blood, human and Julian's darker, almost metallic ichor, and the lingering, acrid smell of discharged energy weapons. Elias appeared, his face ashen, a first aid kit in his trembling hands. He rushed to Julian's side, his distress palpable. "Mr. Thorne, are you all right?" Julian waved him off, though he leaned heavily against a toppled column. "Superficial, Elias. Most of it." His gaze, however, kept returning to Lena, who stood amidst the wreckage, still trembling but upright, her eyes wide with the enormity of what had just happened. "The locket," Julian said, his voice raspy. "They came for the locket." He looked at Lena. "It seems your grandmother entrusted you with something of far greater significance than either of you knew." Lena's hand went to her neck. The locket felt heavy, almost alive. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What does it do?" Julian pushed himself upright, wincing. "It is, among other things, a key, or rather a part of one, to a place, a vault, let us say, that certain factions have sought for centuries, a place rumored to hold knowledge and power that could shift balances best left undisturbed." He looked around the ruined hall. "They believed it was here, within my collection. They were mistaken. The vault is not a physical location easily plundered, and the true key is far more complex than a single trinket." His eyes met hers. "But this locket, it resonates with the energies of that place. It can guide one to other components. Or, in the wrong hands, it could be used to pervert its purpose." Lena felt a chill. Her grandmother, a quiet, unassuming woman who loved gardening and baking, had been guarding a piece of a key to unimaginable power. It seemed impossible. "The symbol," Lena said, remembering the serpentine sigil on the box and from her captivity. "Is it connected?" "Intimately," Julian confirmed. "It is the mark of an ancient order, long thought defunct, who were the original guardians of the vault. Some, it appears, have strayed from their purpose, seeking to exploit its power rather than protect it. The organization that held you captive, they were puppets, pawns for a much older, more dangerous game. Their leader, the Overseer, was merely a local franchise manager for this shadowy cabal. It was a revelation that almost dwarfed the violence she had just witnessed. Her ordeal, the human trafficking, was just a sordid byproduct of a secret war spanning centuries. Twist. Julian isn't just a random powerful being. It's revealed he has a long-standing undeclared war against this specific trafficking network due to a past event that deeply affected him, making Lena's rescue less an accident and more an intersection of fates. This older, more dangerous game was his war. Elias, having quickly assessed Julian's wounds and determining none were immediately life-threatening for someone of his nature, began to methodically check the fallen attackers. "All neutralized, Mr. Thorne," he reported quietly. "No survivors." Julian nodded, his gaze still on Lena. "Your courage, it was unexpected." Lena flushed. I couldn't let them hurt you." It was a simple, honest admission. In that moment of terror, her fear for him had outweighed her fear for herself. The bond, forged in shared peril and quiet moments in the library, had solidified into something fierce and undeniable. A long silence stretched between them, filled with the unspoken. The power dynamic had shifted subtly but profoundly. She was no longer just the rescued victim, and he was no longer just the enigmatic savior. They were allies, survivors, bound by a shared ordeal and perhaps a shared future, however uncertain. Julian finally broke the silence. "The immediate threat is past, but they will regroup. They will know their initial assumptions about the locket's location were wrong. They will know someone here understands its significance." He looked directly at Lena. "They will come for you again, and for the locket." Lena's heart sank. She had hoped it was over. "What do we do?" she asked, the "we" slipping out naturally. Julian's lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It was not a smile of amusement, but of acknowledgement. "For now, we recover, we reinforce, and we prepare." He pushed himself away from the column, standing straighter, some of his immense strength seeming to flow back into him. "Elias, initiate lockdown protocols, full spectrum, and begin the sanitation." Elias nodded, already moving to a hidden control panel. "Immediately, Mr. Thorne." Julian turned back to Lena. His eyes, ancient and deep, held a new light. Not warmth, precisely, but a profound respect. "You are no longer merely a guest in my home, Lena. You are a participant, whether you wished it or not." He extended a hand, not in a gesture of aid, but of partnership. "Come. There is much to discuss, and you, I believe, have earned the right to answers." Lena looked at his outstretched hand, then into his eyes. The fear was still there, a faint tremor deep within her, but it was overshadowed by a strange sense of belonging, of purpose. She had faced death, faced her deepest terrors, and she had not broken. She had found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She placed her hand in his. His grip was cool, firm, reassuring. Together they walked out of the ruined hall, leaving Elias to manage the grim aftermath. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous, but Lena knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would not face it alone. The millionaire vampire was no longer just her rescuer, he was her ally, and she, the poor girl who had escaped captivity, was no longer just a survivor. She was a fighter. The days that followed the attack were a blur of quiet intensity. Julian, with Elias's tireless assistance, worked to repair the damage to his sanctuary, and, more importantly, to bolster its defenses. Lena learned that Julian's domain was far more extensive and technologically advanced than she had ever imagined. Hidden beneath the veneer of ancient warehouses and Gothic charm was a network of cutting-edge security, arcane wards, and escape routes that spoke of centuries of careful, paranoid planning. Julian, true to his word, began to share more with her. He spoke of the locket, explaining that it was one of 3 such artifacts that, when brought together, formed a key not to a physical vault of treasures, but to a confluence of energies, a place where knowledge and power could be accessed or unleashed. He spoke of the ancient order sworn to protect this secret, an order that had fractured over time, with some seeking to exploit what they were meant to guard. The Serpentine sigil was their ancient mark, now corrupted by the Splinter faction. "My own involvement," Julian explained one evening, as they sat in the now-restored library, the scent of beeswax and old paper a comforting familiarity, stems from a promise made long ago to one of an uncorrupted lineage of that order. A promise to help safeguard this knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. His voice was carefully neutral, but Lena sensed a deep, ancient sorrow beneath the words. A lost love, perhaps, or a debt of honor. This provided a clearer motivation for his actions, fulfilling the need for unique vampire motivations beyond brooding. Lena listened, absorbing the incredible story, her world expanding with each revelation. She learned that Julian was not the only one of his kind, though he was ancient and powerful even among them. He spoke of a hidden world, existing in the shadows of human society, with its own rules, its own conflicts, its own long-held grudges. Her role in all this, she came to understand, was pivotal because of the locket. It had chosen her, or her grandmother had chosen her for it, and its connection to her was now undeniable. Julian believed the locket had, in some way, responded to her resilience, her will to survive, amplifying its subtle energies and thus alerting those who sought it. "So you are in a way its current guardian, Lena," Julian told her, his gaze serious. "Whether by fate or by chance, it is bound to you now." The thought was overwhelming, terrifying yet also empowering. She was no longer just Lena, the escaped captive. She was Lena, guardian of a fragment of ancient power. Julian did not ask her to stay. Instead, he laid out her options with stark clarity. "You can leave," he said. "I can provide you with resources, a new identity, a life far away from all of this. The locket. I will find a way to shield its signature, to keep you safe. It will be a diminished life, always looking over your shoulder, but it will be a life." He paused, his dark eyes searching hers. "Or you can stay. Here. With me. We can face what is coming together. It will be dangerous. There will be more attacks, but you will not be alone, and perhaps together we can find a way to secure the locket and the knowledge it protects, for good." Lena looked around the library, at the towering shelves filled with the wisdom and folly of ages. She looked at Julian, this ancient, powerful being who had shown her unexpected kindness, who had fought for her, and for whom she had, in turn, risked her own life. The thought of leaving, of returning to a normal world that no longer felt real to her, was unbearable. Here, amidst the shadows and the secrets, she had found a strange kind of peace, a purpose. "I'll stay," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't want to run anymore." A rare, genuine smile touched Julian's lips. It transformed his face, erasing some of the centuries of weariness, revealing a glimpse of the man he might have been before the weight of immortality settled upon him. "I had hoped you would say that." The resolution was not an ending, but a new beginning. The trafficking ring, the immediate manifestation of the evil that had ensnared her, was gone, its leaders and operatives either dead or scattered, their network dismantled by Julian's decisive actions and the subsequent anonymous tips to authorities that led to wider arrests. Lena found a measure of peace in knowing that others who had suffered might now find justice, though the ghosts of her own captivity and of Anya, the girl she couldn't save, would likely always remain with her, a somber reminder of what she had endured and overcome. She and Julian became true partners. He taught her about the hidden world, about its dangers and its strange wonders. She, in turn, brought a spark of human warmth and resilience into his ancient, solitary existence. She learned to read the subtle cues in his expressions, to understand the unspoken words in his silences. He, in turn, seemed to draw a quiet strength from her unwavering courage, her refusal to be broken. Their bond deepened, evolving from one of mutual protection to a profound, if unconventional, companionship. There were moments of shared vulnerability, quiet conversations late into the night in the library, a shared appreciation for music, for history, for the fragile beauty of the world that Julian had observed for so long, and that Lena was just beginning to rediscover. The romance was not a whirlwind affair, but a slow, steady growth of understanding, respect, and an undeniable soul-deep connection between two beings from vastly different worlds, united by circumstance and choice. One crisp autumn morning, months later, Lena stood with Julian on a secluded balcony overlooking the city. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. Julian, who usually avoided direct sunlight, stood in the deep shadow of the doorway, but he watched the dawn with her, a rare indulgence. The air was clean, carrying the scent of distant rain and the faint, earthy aroma of fallen leaves from the courtyard below. In Lena's hand was the locket. It no longer felt like a burden, but a responsibility, a symbol of her journey. She had learned more about its history, its connection to her lineage, a line of quiet, unassuming women who had, in their own ways, been guardians of small, significant truths. "They will come again," Julian said softly, his voice a low rumble beside her. "The Order is ancient, their resources vast. This is not over." Lena nodded. She knew, but the fear was no longer paralyzing. "We'll be ready," she said, her voice calm, confident. She looked at him, at this eternal, enigmatic vampire who had become her unlikely ally, her protector, her friend, and perhaps in time, something more. He met her gaze, and in his ancient eyes she saw not just the shadows of the past, but a flicker of hope for the future, a future they would face together. He reached out and gently took her hand, his cool fingers lacing through hers. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes of the trust and affection that had grown between them. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the city in its warm, life-giving light, Lena leaned her head against Julian's shoulder. The city hummed below them, a vast, complex organism, unaware of the ancient secrets and silent battles waged in its shadows. But here, in this quiet moment, there was peace. A fragile peace, perhaps, but one hard-won and deeply cherished. It was a new dawn, not just for the city, but for Lena, the girl who had escaped captivity, and for Julian, the vampire who had found in her a reason to once again embrace the fight, and perhaps even the light, the resilience of the human spirit, the possibility of redemption, and the enduring strength of unlikely bonds. These were the truths that now illuminated their shared path forward, a vivid image of hope against the backdrop of a world forever changed. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe, hit the like button, and comment what you thought. Pick a link on the screen for more stories.